Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Security Repo podcast. I'm coming at you from the road this time. You may notice that the background is a little different for those that are tuning in on the video, and I'm really thrilled to have a fantastic guest with us today. Today's episode, we're going to be focusing on a couple of really interesting topics, including the security community and also product security specifically. I'm hoping that we actually have enough time to get into this, because as I was writing out all the questions, I had to restrain myself. But that is largely due to the fantastic guest we have in Avi Douglen. He's the founder and CEO at Bounce Security. And Avi is really specialized in making sure that organizations are implementing correct product security and cost-effective product security within their development life cycles. And he is also a big member of the security community. He has been a chapter chair at OWASP, amongst other things, and there is plenty of fantastic content of Avi talking. And he's just told us that he's going to be in Lisbon for the OWASP meeting, delivering trainings there. So if you are listening from Lisbon, I'll definitely head to that way. But Avi, thank you so much for joining us here, and welcome to the Security Repo podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks for that wonderful intro. One comment I will say, OWASP conference is global. AppSec Lisbon, it's a global conference. You don't have to be local. Most of the people are actually attending from far away. Well, semi-far.
Well, we'll make sure that we put a link to the show notes in that. If you're listening and you want to check that out, there'll be a link down there. Dwayne, why don't you kick us off on our conversation?
Thanks very much for being here, Avi. Huge fan of OWASP here on the Get Guardian side of me personally. I'm a member. So we have a lot of different people who tune into the show. I meet people who are from developer and from other backgrounds who might not be familiar with OWASP. I would love to hear from a chapter chair. How do you describe OWASP to somebody who's brand new to the organization?
First, a small correction. I am no longer the OWASP chair, the chapter chair, of the Israel chapter. I am on the leader board of the chapter, but I have passed that mantle over. I actually am currently the chair of the global board of OWASP. So it's even better, right?
Even better.
So for those of you folks listening that are not familiar with OWASP, go right now to owasp.org. That's Open Worldwide Application Security Project. This is an open source. It's a community-based, worldwide, with the mission is to make application security more accessible. To make it more accessible for developers to build more secure products, to make it more accessible for QA and test teams to test security into the product, to make it more accessible for security engineers and penetration testers and even non-application specific security people like CISOs, to make all of that more accessible. There's a huge amount of everything is free and open source content there. There's a lot of resources like developer guides and testing tools and standards like the ASVS and SAM and workflows. And there are tools that are available to be used at whatever role you are currently wearing. There are tools for you to be using for that. So there's a ton of great stuff out there.
So it's an awesome organization. I definitely encourage everyone to go to that site as well. But you've been doing OWASP stuff for a while now. The organization's 20 years old. How did you get started? Like, what was the barrier to entry for you? Like, what was your process of getting involved in the community in the first place?
So the important thing to realize is that OWASP, as a worldwide community, there are chapters literally in hundreds of cities. I wouldn't say every big city, but most of them, and a lot of small cities as well. Literally hundreds of chapters around the world. And that's how I actually got into it. When I first started, I used to be a developer, and then I kind of got recruited into a security company. I was developing security stuff, so I got recruited into a security company. And the first thing they gave me was a bunch of OWASP guides. Cool. OWASP guides, a lot of great content. I was hungry to learn all that. And then at some point, my boss said, you know what, there's an OWASP chapter starting, first meetup, let's go join that. I'm like, there's people behind these guides? There's a community there? It didn't even occur to me that you could be part of this great community that produces all this amazing content. So this was back in 2006, I think, was the first time I attended a chapter meetup. And the interesting thing about how, well, I guess most volunteer communities work this way. I asked the chapter leader, can I help with anything? Can you help me set up something? And he says, that's a great idea. Why don't you go and do that? And that's the way the community works. You have a great idea, go and do that. And this is why we have so many contributors to our projects, to the community, to chapters, events, and all of that, because it's decentralized. You have a good idea, go and do it. That's where volunteers come in handy.
And let's never forget that the whole organization starts with the word open. And that's really indicative of any kind of truly open organization. Is like, you have a great idea, let's put it into action and let's help as many people as we can with it. And I love that.
Yeah, 100%. And the interesting thing is when a person volunteers, what do? You give them more work. And I got more and more, and basically got suckered into it, you might say, and volunteering more, both on the chapter and then helping build the AppSec Israel conference, which is really big on years that we can actually have that. And then started getting more involved in the global events as well. And like I said, there's a ton of projects. There's hundreds of projects. There's plenty of work to go around.
Yeah, I think everyone has this moment when they're starting off in the security kind of world. So my background is in engineering, building engineering, and then I went into software development, and then went into where I found my niche in security. And there's this moment where you go into your first security meetup, maybe an OWASP meetup, maybe something along those lines, and you kind of like, oh god, I hope no one asks me questions, and they're all going to find out I'm a fraud and I shouldn't
Oh
be
yeah.
here. And none of that comes true. The security community is really one of the most welcoming, one of the best
Mhm.
communities. So as someone that's kind of really been part of this for a long time, since 2006, probably someone that's helped shape the way that the community is. Why is security such a kind of a special community that's got such good foundations? Why do you think that is?
Um, I think there's two parts of this, and I'll start with the second part. Is that so many of us got into the field just as you said, Mackenzie. Like it's where we found our niche. We come from other backgrounds. I mean, people starting out now in security, but back in the day, there was no security to get started in. And we got into it because it was interesting, because we liked seeing a broken thing and fixing it, right? Some more like the breaking it, some more like the fixing it. And you can't do that alone. It takes a village, right? And it kind of grew up. The community kind of started as grassroots. There was no you don't go do a degree in computer security because it wasn't a thing that was officially recognized or defined, and the only way we learn this is from other people. And that kind of comes back to the second part of the answer, rather, the first part of the answer. And I think the reason for it is because there's so many absolutely amazing people in this community, and it's people. It's all about the people. That said, there are also some bad cases, right? We know how to break systems. We know how to be abusers, unfortunately, and there are some really bad stories there as well.
Yeah, you've given us a good leeway in bad stories and areas. You gave a really interesting talk. I think at B-Sides Tel Aviv,
Yeah.
where you're talking about the risks that the community was facing. You also went through kind of threat modeling there, which was we won't get into that. We'll be here for hours. But I wonder, can you give us kind of some of the highlights of that talk, of the risks that the security community is facing, and also why why is it such a risk? Like, what would happen if the security community kind of vanished?
Well, I mean, let's start with the end, right? If the security community vanished, there would be not much security. I mean, ideally, security would be automatically built into everything already, but we know that's not really the case. And it's the security community that drives both the implementation and the discovery and the innovations and all that stuff, right? So we absolutely need that security community. So my keynote there was actually it had two purposes in that keynote, and one was to introduce threat modeling to a lot of security people who are not familiar with that way of systemic thinking about it, about how the application works. You just approach it. Here's an API. Here's an endpoint. Let's just go and hack it, without thinking about how the internals work, the interactions. So that was one part of it. The other part of it was to address some of the social issues, right? The problems that our industry has with lack of diversity, the problems that we have with some of those abusers in the industry. And interestingly enough, earlier that year, I think this was B-Sides Tel Aviv 2022. Earlier that year, only a couple months before that, a different B-Sides event actually was hosting, as a keynote speaker, somebody who was kicked out of other conferences for abusing people, for attacking people, and I don't remember the details of it, but it's a problem. So A, how does that happen in the first place? And B, why are events still hosting and allowing people like that to come? So that was kind of some of the drivers that I had there. And I'm not going to try and repeat the whole talk all at once. I want to talk about how I got there, because I talk to a lot of people. It's kind of weird for, a straight white guy, somebody who likes like me, stand up on stage and talking about, well, diversity issues and what it's like to be a minority and what it's like to be all these things. On the other hand, the people that you expect to be talking about that don't need to be having that conversation. They could talk about all the cool stuff that they're doing. You don't need to see a woman of color talking only about what it's like to be a woman of color in tech. She could talk about the tech. So I kind of felt like it's on us to do that, right? But I don't have that background. I don't have those experiences. So I made sure to go and talk to literally dozens of people in underrepresented groups, people that have gone through those experiences in all different kinds of ways, to hear from them. And I realized that I could not talk about their experiences. I could not have a talk to them about what they went through, but rather to take those experiences and translate that into a framework that I understand. Threat modeling, right? That's something that I know, and I'm able to translate that for other security people who might not have those experiences, but are now able to actually understand how to actually consider them, how to think about them. And that talk, I kind of wound up at the point of, okay, so what should people like me be doing? Being allies, and I touched on that. Basically, the countermeasures, being the blue team of the community, so to speak.
Mm.
So one of the piece of pushback that I have encountered in trying to proselytize the OWASP community and like invite everyone in its big tent is that uh second and third word in the name, web application. And people are like, well, is it just are we just focused on the application layer at this point? Like, is it a misnomer at this point that we've named it OWASP, but really is it a bigger tent than that? And a second part follow up to that question is, where else can people go join a community around security? What are the alternatives to OWASP, and is there a collaboration capability there or collaboration possibilities there? I know it's a lot of question there, but
You know,
I'll let you talk.
yeah, and you're absolutely right. And it was realized very quickly that it was a mistake to call this Open Web Application Security Project, because even from the very, very beginning, it was never just web. I don't know if you realize this, but the official name is now Open Worldwide Application Security Project, not web, because just over a year ago, we
I didn't know that.
changed the backronym of OWASP, right? We kept the OWASP and just changed that one word. Very few people are actually aware of that. It doesn't matter, but it's still applications. And we had a whole discussion. Well, should it be applications? Maybe it's something else. Personally, I prefer talking about product security, not software, not applications, product. The whole thing is a product. But a case was made that everything is an application, right? Whether you're talking about a cloud application, a mobile application, an IoT, blockchain, whatever you want to, LLM applications now, right? They're all applications. So yeah, I'm comfortable with that. But it's not about hardware. Sure, it's not about um, government processes for the most part, right? It's not about red tape. It's not about policies. It's about the applications, technical stuff. I agree. We got rid of the web. I'm comfortable enough with the application part. As far as, and that's still a really big tent, right? Almost everything we do technically, it's not just developers, big chunk of that, but it's everything around that to use the applications. As far as other communities, there are plenty of other communities. Um, I don't think they're quite comparable. So, for example, you have B-Sides, which is a fantastic community or collection of mini communities with loosely connected, but they don't actually produce stuff, projects, things that you can use. Their communities to go and hear talks now and then, maybe a conference, and that's fantastic. And then you have other communities slash organizations, like, for example, you have CSA, right? You have OpenSSF, and there's different perspectives, different focuses on what they're trying to do. Even Eclipse has a lot of the Eclipse Foundation has a bunch of security projects out there. We recently started collaborating with them directly. We try to collaborate with whoever and wherever we can, as long as it meets our mission. Our mission is to make the world more secure, right? More secure products, more secure applications. If there's anybody out there that can help us with it, we're happy to do that.
I think this is a good segue to kind of move on to the kind of the next topic that we wanted to cover here. You talked about having more secure products. And product security in particular is something that I guess is a really passion for you. You are the CEO of Bound Security, and from everything that I see when you're talking, is that's a security, a boutique security firm that really looks at product security. So for those that may not know, what is kind of products? We have a lot of kind of terms and acronyms. We have application security and product security, and then we have supply chain security and other areas like that. Can you take us through product security and what that kind of covers holistically?
So I'll talk about some of the other terms. The reason that I've taken to be calling this product security is because I felt that the other terms are kind of too narrow, right? A lot of people, you say application security, you think along the lines of either web applications, right? Or you think about the application layer in the OSI model, the OSI model, which never actually existed. Um, it's theoretical. But then it's just that application layer. So you're talking about the HTTP protocol, but not anything above that. What about the business logic? What about the actual frameworks and the applications? So application security tends to be a few different narrow views. That doesn't necessarily mean it that way, just some people view it that way. Like, it's application security, I don't need to deal with cloud. Well, what about the cloud platforms? Is that part of AppSec or CloudSec? I've seen organizations with different teams to handle AppSec and CloudSec, which is weird to me because it's all part of the same product, right? Software security was a term that I'm not hearing as often anymore, but that feels like it's just the code. It's not just the code. What about the configuration? What about the logic? What about the infrastructure and platforms and all that stuff? The frameworks, right? So you're kind of missing out on that. But I focus more on the product because that also kind of aligns with my thinking around what actually matters. It's not the code that matters. What matters is the value that you generate. What matters is what this product actually does, right? It's that business stuff, right? That we techies don't like thinking about, but it's really important to elevate from just the lines of code to, well, what does these lines of code do? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that makes total sense, and I have this trouble as well when we're talking about like application security. It's like where are the borders? Like where are the borders for this? It's because it can stretch out and then it turns into another one. I love the fact that when we're thinking about security, product security makes more sense for me to talk about, to think about, and it covers. Yeah, and it can cover what application security does, but it can also cover a whole lot more, and that makes total sense to me.
It also opens it up to additional stakeholders. For example, product
Mm,
managers, right? QA. I've had some really great conversations with sales folk. Why would we
mm.
want to talk to sales folk? Well, because they're the ones who actually have to package sales and marketing, right? You can package up security as additional, as unique selling propositions. You can package this up as additional value that you want to buy us instead of the competitors because we're more secure, because we offer you better security features and more peace of mind. And I've seen companies do this really well to package that up once you have a proven level of security, to package that up as there's actual real benefits to be had to the business here. It's not just what can go wrong.
So let's talk in practical nuts and bolts. I like thinking in terms of well, actual next steps. If I buy in and say, all right, I am on board with you. The mission, product security is the right path. What do I do? What's that starting point for me?
I don't have a single one answer for you. I have a few different approaches, and I'm a consultant, so I have to give you multiple answers, right? Um, if it's a very early stage thing, right, and you're just starting out, well, then plan accordingly, right? You can build a strategy according to this, and this is something that I don't do often enough. I would love to do more, but actually build out a security strategy, like a product security roadmap. What are the pieces that are most important? What will provide the most value to the business, right? Do I start scanning my code? Do I start with a pen test? Should I add more features? It's not just about checking that box of we are now secure, we're meeting this standard or that regulation. Sometimes that matters, right? You can't sell to certain companies unless you have SOC 2 compliance. Great. If that's what matters, that helps you sell product. That's what we'll focus on. If you're talking to a basic consumer market, well, maybe that's not what's important. And this, I won't call it security theater, but more visible parts of security are more important, right? So that's one approach, planning this out strategically. More tactically would be, and this is what I usually start with, is threat modeling, right? Figure out what security actually matters to your product. And just getting those stakeholders in the room to talk about how the system works and what security means for me, we will often just even right there before getting to a full-blown threat modeling, we're already getting so much value, so much benefit from just getting them to have those discussions for, oh, maybe we should be spending more on this part and not on that part.
Yeah. This is a perfect segue into a question that I have. There is you've coined. I believe you've coined it, but if not, you talk about it a lot, and it's the first time I'd heard it. Something called value-driven threat modeling. So you were just kind of talking about adding value through threat modeling. Can you walk us through what value driven threat modeling is, and why that may look the same or different to kind of other types of when we think about threat modeling?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to start with where that actually came from. And I kind of borrowed the term from marketing, value-driven marketing.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. You see where I'm going with that, right? And this connects right back to what I was saying of what actually matters. How do I package that up to something that is super important? It's not about being 100% comprehensive. And by the way, I talk about value driven security in general, not just the threat modeling. But it's not about hitting a checklist, right? It's not checkbox compliance. It's not about making sure that I do everything possible because, I mean, come on, there's no perfect security, but it's about picking the most important things. If there's 150 things on your must-do list, you're only going to get through 3 or none. You'd rather choose 3. What are the 3 that will move the needle the most, that will have the biggest impact on your security ROI or just the business ROI? And it's not just about not being hacked. It's not just about preventing those events. And it's not just a cost center. Security often isn't, but can also be a value center. Thinking about this in the context of a product, I've heard recently somebody trying to recapture this as product-led security. If you're familiar with the term product-led growth, again,
Yeah.
another semi-marketing thing, right? But it's the same idea. What actually contributes other than just taking the garbage out, but what actually prepares a nice dish? Anyway, so that's the thinking behind value-driven threat modeling, the super lightweight approach. And I have a couple of things around that, but it usually comes down to start thinking about the value chain of the feature that you're building. Why are we building this feature? And we want to get some value out of it. Usually, the product management has some definition for that. Oh, we're going to get sell more product, upgrade sales, uh, get more eyeballs, whatever that is. Maybe it's just more efficient. If that's what we're trying to get from the feature, well, how does this feature produce that value? And you have the value chain, and now you can put guardrails on that. You can make sure that that happens. Kind of putting guardrails on a happy path of the feature.
I like that. We end up testing the happy path a lot, but we don't put enough guardrails around making sure people stay on it. But speaking of that, those missteps people take and why we need guardrails in the first place, what are the common missteps you're seeing people take specifically around threat modeling? This is a fascinating conversation for me. Like where are people getting it wrong in just any approach to threat modeling, let alone the value driven one?
The biggest mistake is not doing it. That's
Mm.
the number one thing. Do something, do anything. Stop for 5 minutes at the beginning of a feature and think about what security matters. Doomsday scenario. What's the worst thing that could happen? I like to frame this as PR-driven threat modeling. Your boss wakes you up at 2 a.m. on a Saturday night and say the site's down, or we're in the news. You already know why you're in the news. You know what that's going to be. Deal with that ahead of time. Put out the fires before they're lit. Right? So you can do that. That at least that's the bare minimum. Start with something. Have a conversation about what security means. That's, I think, number one mistake. Another bunch of good mistakes you can find on the Threat Modeling Manifesto. That's threatmodelingmanifesto.org. And there's a bunch of anti-patterns there. For example, one person being responsible for it, even though they don't really know how the system works. Um, Trying to do this as waiting and keep processing a kind of the parallel to analysis paralysis, constantly thrashing and not actually finishing because it needs to actually come out and be incremental work in progress. Always, it's never done. And there are a few other really nice anti-patterns there as well. Um, just get started. Find something that works for you. Do something, and then you can work on making it better. Interestingly, that's actually built into the process. uh, uh, Classically, we think about threat modeling as answering four questions. What are we working on? What can go wrong with threats? What are we going to do about it? Build countermeasures. And the fourth question is, did we do a good job? Basically, doing QA for both the result and the process. Can we be more efficient? How do we get better at this?
Speaking of getting better at things, if organizations want to get better at product security, then I think a good place to start is probably someone that specializes, lives and breathes, believes this.
Sure.
Can you give us a quick overview of bounce security? What makes you guys a little bit different to other kind of security firms or security shops out there?
Well, I think it's some of the things that we were just talking about, right? Focusing on the bottom line and not just the
Mm.
technical things. To be clear, that doesn't mean we ignore the technical things. We're not, high level business consultants like McKinsey or things like that, McKinley, whatever it's called. We're not that kind of consultants, but we always try to translate this into something that actually matters, right? The threat modeling exercise is not producing 3,300 pages that nobody will ever look at. The end result is a more secure product. If you don't implement it, it was pointless, right? And we're very connected to how the developers work, how the products are produced, how that works. We're always driven by what actually matters. How do we produce the most value? And one of the things that we don't do very explicitly is pen testing. It's important, but if you don't have the rest of your process right, it's not going to produce as much value as getting the rest of the stuff right. So that's the type of thing that we won't do. And I think a majority of security consultancies are really more testing firms. And we don't do testing. We work with the teams to build it up right so that when you get tested, you're actually in a much better place and your results are actually a lot better and more efficient.
I like that approach a lot because one of the
Thank you.
main pieces of pushback I've ever heard on, oh, we need more pen testing, more consultants on this is like, well, they're going to check boxes. And we all know compliance isn't security, but there's a lot of people selling, we'll check the boxes for you. Therefore, you're secure. So, like, that's like take a step back and we're not going to be those people. That's what I think is just always important to highlight.
Yeah. Listen, Dwayne, we always need more testing. It's true. We always need more. Bring us back in 3 months and in a year and in 6 years. My goal is always to get myself fired, because this is not intended to be a perpetual motion device. It's a point to come in and fix something. Sometimes things take a long time. You want to build a new, I don't know, AppSec program or a secure software development lifecycle. That's DLC, right? That takes cultural transformation. That will take 2 to 3 years until you're really done, right? But I'm not there the whole time. I'm not coming back 6 years later to keep doing the same thing, right? The idea is to come in, have the impact, make the value, and then move on. We do have clients that we have worked with for many years, but not the same thing. Not bring us back to test you again and retest and retest and retest, but it's getting to higher levels of maturity and working higher and producing higher levels of value. One other
Dwayne,
thing that I'll throw
oh,
out, if you don't mind, is as long as we talked about, and you mentioned already the OWASP conference in AppSec Lisbon. One of the things that I've been getting a lot more into now that I think some of your listeners might be interested in is privacy. Obviously, privacy is hot. There's regulations all around it now. Everybody needs to do it. Unfortunately, privacy often gets translated as one of two things. Either that checkbox exercise, you get your GRC people, your lawyers to come in and say you're compliant, or stuff like, okay, you have cookie management stuff there. Or on the other side, I hear this still from so many security people, and I used to be one of these people saying this. Oh, privacy? Yeah, yeah, we're good. We have confidentiality. We protect all your secret data. But really, when we talk about privacy by design and technical privacy engineering, it goes so far beyond just data confidentiality that so many people don't know this, and there's a massive skills gap. There's not a lot of people that have these technical privacy skills. You got your technical people, and you got your privacy people, and there's very little overlap. So at Global Apps like Lisbon, I'm actually collaborating with Dr. Kim Woods, who's one of the leading privacy researchers, created the Lin Dunn framework for threat modeling, if you're familiar with. And we're doing a technical privacy by design training, mostly aimed at security engineers, to add this to their toolkit, to add this to their skills.
we're coming to the end. I just want to point out to the audience that we do have links in the show notes to some of the training sessions and up and coming events that we just talked about. So if you're looking for them, you know where to look. Uh, we're coming to the end, as I just said, but we like to play a game with all the guests, which is called Best and Worst. And we want to ask, what is the best security advice that you've ever received or you would give someone? And what is the worst security advice that maybe someone told you, or hey, even you've told someone? Let's start with the best.
Uh, okay, you know what? I'm going to be a shill for a second and say the best security advice is to join the security community, attend an OWASP meetup, find the local chapter, start using. Listen, the OWASP cheat sheets project is such an amazing resource. Targeted, detailed information that you need, specific active action items in a very targeted set of what you need to do wherever. There's standards. There's so much great stuff. That's going to be my best security advice there.
And let's flip it on its head. What's the worst? The
The
worst security
worst.
advice.
I have so many good examples of that. I'm gonna pick on one that one of the first things that I started fighting against long time ago and is still out there is around password policies and password definitions. You still see so much bad advice of how to make a strong password from security people, not understanding how passwords work. At some point, I realized this was from a lot of lack of threat modeling authentication mechanisms. Um, yeah, a little bit repetitive in what I'm saying, but we're still seeing so much bad, not just advice, password policies,
Yeah.
enforcing weak passwords. The weakest password I have on any system is for my bank. What
Right.
the heck? Because the bank has this crazy security policy that was probably written in 1998 or 2004 that doesn't was never actually well thought out, and is limited to, I think, like 10 or 12 characters and limited character set. And I'd rather have a passphrase, give me 5, 6 words or something else. And I just can't do that there.
Yeah. It's it's and trying to get my parents to change their password habits. Like it's such a fight, I'm trying to convince them to get a password manager, but so far in vain. But I have got them onto passphrases now, so that's
That
good.
works. But password
Yeah.
manager is definitely useful. I got my mother using it. I don't think she uses it often anymore, but she has it. But let me ask you, you've asked this for a lot of people. What was the worst security advice that you have been told from people that you've asked?
One of the funniest ones that I had, I'll ask Dwayne after this, was from Tom Forbes, and he's a pen tester. He was doing an assignment on an organization, and they got all the kinds of admin rights and basically pwned the whole organization. And how they did it was because there was hard coded passwords in an application that they had, which gave them access to the network, which they gave them laterally, yada yada yada. And they said to him that, well, actually, that is secure, and you failed the assignment because decompiling that app would be illegal.
Okay,
So we all know that bad guys follow at least legal
the
practices.
bad guys will follow them. Right. Yeah,
So
that's pretty good.
scratching your head.
That's
I
really
thought,
confusingly convoluted, but
yeah. It wasn't. Maybe Dwayne has a more punchy one.
The one that I always go back to, because I'm an old Drupal and WordPress guy, is somebody said once in an optimization talk, it's like, oh yeah, just remove the path to the login screen. So like, don't use WP admin as your login. And it's like that doesn't solve anything. You know that, right? Like there are multiple people at this conference like came up to me after his talk is like, that so it became this whole thing of like you can't have security through obscurity. That like anybody that leads you down that path, you should just point at the Tesla article of them getting pwned for putting the admin on a different port, but they didn't secure it at all. Like, yeah, they'll never find it. The bad guys, they're never gonna like actually scan.
yeah, I mean, the checkpoint flaw that came out this week was something similar to that as well. I don't know is that the worst advice or the most common?
Ooh, it's pretty bad. I don't know if
It's
it's
Yeah.
also
common
pretty
anymore.
common.
Yeah, that's I mean, worst is subjective, but
Yeah, the worst and
Yeah,
most common.
we get such a variety of comments on this. I think one of my favorites that I had that were of good security advice was from uh, Eric Kabitas, and I think it's one that's probably going to polarize a lot of people. And he said that in security, like we should be able to. I'm going to rephrase this. The exact words that he said was that in security we need to implement yes, but. And so people always will say, can I do this? Can I leave this application publicly accessible? Can I open source this tool? Can I not have MFA on this? And a lot of people in security would just say, no, like you can't do that. You have to have this. And he had said the best advice is to go, yes, but. Like, yes, you can do that, but here are the ramifications of that. And if you find that acceptable, then you can go ahead and do that. Because I think a lot of people in security, it just becomes overwhelming of, no lockdown and that. So I feel like that's a polarizing one because I think a lot of people would disagree. But I really enjoyed at least kind of like the concept around that.
I really like that. I would suggest one small change to that instead of yes, but. If they say everything before the word but is, well, yes, and. Take a page
Yeah.
out of actors and
Improv.
stuff like that. Improv, yeah, exactly. It has such a psychological impact. It really does. Yes, but do this. Great, that's a condition. I'll do that. Yes, but
Yeah.
sounds like a constraint. So I
Yeah.
really
I
like
think,
that
yeah.
approach to
yeah,
Yeah.
the and gives you a chance to explain why it's a terrible idea.
that.
And we'll need to implement this entire other security thing, and we'll need to raise awareness across everybody, and it's going to cost an extra $20,000. That's the easiest way to get out of extra work as a consultant.
I like that. I really like that approach, though, and you're absolutely right, because and this goes back to that quote that you know, Mackenzie, of security at the expense of usability comes at the expense of security, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's exactly that. And if you say yes, you'll be able to get them to do it right. If you say no, they'll figure out how to do it anyway.
And now that you've said that quote, I can create a quote a PNG and share it around everywhere, because that's really been like my favorite quote that I have. That was a quote that someone else said on the podcast, but they were referencing you.
Yep.
So yeah, that really is, like, to me, that is such an impactful quote. And unlike what we were just doing blubbering around, it's so to the point and it's so clear, and I feel like that's definitely one for the record books. I think of my favorite.
Thank you. Wow.
My favorite quotes of all time. Yeah.
Wow.
And that's how I found out about you, and then I went down a rabbit hole listening to all your stuff and loved it, and
Thank you.
Was nervous, but I'm really happy you agreed to come on the show. Which thank you again for coming on, because it's
Appreciate you having me.
really great. Any final words, Dwayne, before we hit the big red button?
No, I just want to say thanks very much. Really appreciate you being here and sharing your knowledge with me.
Thanks for having me.